Now let's start in detail about SAML. Okay, so until this that we have seen, right, like that day we have seen what is SAML and like how the SAML will be transferring the data between both the applications, which means identity and service provider. So identity provider is nothing but an tool that is taking care of performing the authentication and authorization. So here in this scenario, Okta will be the identity provider, and the service provider will be the application where the end users are getting some service. Okay, so that application has been integrated with Okta for SSO. Okay, so that we will call it a service provider. So whenever a user tries to log into the service provider, for example, whenever they are hitting the URL, okay, maybe https://salesforce.cognizant.com. Okay, this is the URL that they will be hitting. Once they hit this URL, okay, they are accessing the service provider basically. Okay, that URL will be routed to the Okta URL, because Okta is an identity provider system. So in service provider, we have a configuration that whenever the request comes into the organization's Salesforce application, that request should automatically routed to the IDP, okay, identity provider side, which is Okta here. Okay, you will be prompted for user ID and password in the Okta console, and if you enter your user ID and password, authentication authorization will take place in Okta. Once that is done, Okta will again send a note or send a response back to the application, Salesforce application, saying that the user have a proper access and the user is an authenticated user. Likewise, it will send a response from identity provider to service provider. Okay, that is what the flow will work basically. There will be another flow. Okay, the first flow that I said, right, if you are hitting https://salesforce.cognizant.com, it's an ESP initiated flow. Okay, service provider initiated flow, because you are entering the service provider's URL. Okay, but now let's take an example. You are logging into Okta. Okay, and in Okta you can see the list of tiles available in the Okta console. Okay, from in the tile you can see a Salesforce application tile also. Okay, if you click that, or if you copy that if you copy that URL, right, for that application tile, you can see the URL starts with https:// your organizations.okta.com. Let's say if it is a cognizant.okta.com. Okay, from that user access the Salesforce application, automatically he will be routed to the https://salesforce.cognizant.com URL. Okay, this is an IDP based URL, IDP initiated URL. You are trying to access an application access from Okta URL. Okay, but if you access it from the Salesforce URL, that we will call it a service provider initiated SSO. Okay, flow.
Okay,
is it clear? Any questions on that IDP and SP?
Okay, clear.
Okay, now let's see how that SAML works. Okay, so here you can see the step by step 1 2 3 4 5. Okay, first user logs into SSO, which means user logs into Okta. Okay, from Okta he is trying to access an application. In this scenario, you can take Salesforce application. Okay, he's trying to access the application. So that is the second step. Okay, what application will do is service provider check the user credential with the identity provider, which means if you access that URL, if you access that Okta URL, what it happens is Okta will send a note to the service provider Salesforce application here. Okay, we said about response, right? So Okta will send a response to the Salesforce application. Okay, that's what here it says. Service providers check the user credentials with the identity provider. Okay, identity provider is sending a response to that application, and application will validate it, and it will allow the user to access that application. That is the that is step 3. Okay, now step 4, identity providers send an authentication back to the service provider. Okay, I think this is something different. Okay, let me come from the beginning. Okay, user logs into SSO. Here it is not SSO, actually it is application. Okay, user logs into application. I think I have to edit it. I'll do it. User logs into application, which means https://salesforce.com. Okay, he is logging into the application. Okay, and he is trying to access that Salesforce web page. That's what he is doing. So that is the second step. Third step, what it will do is service provider, which is a Salesforce, Salesforce will say like, okay, there is a request came from this user. He wants to access this page, our Salesforce page, Salesforce application. Okay, it will knows that. Okay, what service provider will do is service provider will send a note to identity provider, and identity provider will validate that information. Okay, whoever is logging in, and whether the person who is logging in, he have access to that application or not. Okay, that's what here it is mentioned. Service providers check these user credentials and in the identity provider. So service provider will send a note to the identity provider for checking their user credentials and the authorization information. Okay, and once the identity provider validates that information, okay, I'm saying, I said right, service provider will request the identity provider to perform these actions like validate credentials, validate the authorizations mechanisms. Okay, once it is validated, once it is came to identity provider will validate that, and identity provider have to send that validation detail back to the application. That validation message will have that, yes, this is an authenticated user, this user have access to this application. Okay, that message. Or it will send a message like, no, this is not an appropriate user, it's not the proper user, so you should not grant access to that user and access application access. So likewise it will send a message. That what it is mentioned as step 4. Okay, identity provider sends an authorization and authentication messages back to the service provider. Okay, the flow is very simple. Like if you start from service provider will send a note to identity provider will validate that information, and it will send back the message back to the application, okay, to the service provider. And once that is done, user can able to log into the applications, okay, whatever the application that he tries to access.
Okay.
Any questions on it? Is just a over high view flow. Okay, it's not like a detailed one. Let's next slide we will see in detail about that.
Okay.
So this is in detail flow how SAML works. Okay. Yeah, so here you can see 3 components. First one is identity provider, okay, which is Okta in this scenario. This is service provider, which is Salesforce in this scenario, and this is a browser. So this browser can be anything. It can be Google Chrome, or it can be Mozilla, or it can be Edge, whatever the browser it is. Okay. Okay, now user is going to access any of user is going to access the Salesforce application from browser only. Okay, that's the first step. End user access service provider from browser. Okay, once he enter the URL will take you to the service provider. Okay, service provider configuration. In the backend, what it happens is service provider will validate that. Okay, and it will say like, okay, we need to get this user authentication authorization information. So what service provider will do? Service provider will redirect that request to the browser again. Okay, that's what here it is mentioned. The second step, service provider redirects the SAML request back to the browser. Okay, and browser will redirect the same SAML request to identity provider. Okay, identity provider will receive that. Okay, and it will check for the user account password. Okay, it will ask for you to enter the user ID and password. Okay, that's what this middle step, identify and authenticate the user. Okay, so once that happens, once the user account have entered their user ID and password from the browser, okay, in the Okta console, what Okta will do is Okta will validate that in the backend. Okay, in the backend it will validate the user account and password and the authorization information. Okay, once it is validated, and it will generate a message. Okay, how that message looks like is, it's SAML assertion. Okay, it's like an assertion. I think that day we have asked that we have talked about how the assertion will looks like. Okay, it starts from the open greater than symbol and close like greater than symbol. Sorry, less than. Okay, less than and greater than symbol, and in the middle there will be an attribute name, and if you pass any information between that attribute name, that will be transferred between applications. Okay, likewise it will generate an assertion message. Okay, that message will be posted back to the browser. Okay. Here you can see that's the fifth step that has been completed on this browser. Okay, now browser will send that SAML assertion back to the service provider, because service provider need that message. Okay, that message contains whether that user have access to that application or not, or what level of access that a user have access towards it. So those details, right, service provider needs it. Then only service provider can able to initiate the or grant a session. okay, to the user, grant an application session to the users. So that's what it says. So the browser relays SAML session back to service provider. Okay, browser will send a SAML session message back to the service provider. And here in the step, if the user is authenticated, SP sends the security context to the browser. Okay, okay. So what this step says is, if the service provider receive that information, receive that message, okay, that message will again be validated in the service provider, and it will send a note to the browser saying that right now user can able to access the application. Okay, now again browser will initiate a resource request. What is resource request? It is requesting for the console access. Okay, browser is requesting for the console access, because right now we are trying to access that console only, so that needs to be requested by the browser. That's what this 8th step mentioned: request resource from service provider from browser. Okay, browser will initiate that. Okay, if the SAML session has been validated already and the user information has been validated already with the help of identity provider, now service provider knows that, okay, this browser is being this browser is requesting this resource. So now I have validated the message that has been sent from identity provider. Everything looks fine. Now the service provider will send a resource back to the browser. So once it is sent, I can able to see that the application screen, application console, I can say. So this is the flow, entire flow that starts from end user whenever he tries to log into any application, and it ends how the resources are being allocated to that users.
Okay.
Any questions on this flow?
Yeah, it's clear.
Okay, fine. So now we have talked about how the flow is happening.
This 7th one, right? So after browsers this assertion back to the service provider, then the service provider send back to that browser. This authentication is already validated, right?
Yes,
so
authentication is already done, but service provider got that information, got that message, okay, and it will validate in the service provider end also first time. Okay, once it is validated, service provider will send a notification to the browser saying that, hey, whatever the information that we got from this identity provider is a valid one. Okay, now the browser, okay, you can able to request for the resource. The resource can be anything, like it can be the admin console, or it can be the end user dashboard. I mean the Salesforce end user dashboard, I'm saying, or the reporting dashboard, whatever it is. Okay, so the security context has been already, the message has been already validated, and that message will be stored in the service provider. That we will call it as session cookies. Okay, in the service provider, session cookies will be stored. So whenever you want to access any of the different component inside the Salesforce, automatically the browser will send a note to the service provider, okay, requesting for that resource. That resource is like an as I said, admin dashboard, reporting dashboard, end user dashboard, whatever the dashboard is. So those are the resource. Okay, only with the help of single user ID and credentials, you are granting access to admin console, you are granting access to report admin access, end user dashboard access, so everything. So how it came is with the help of that session cookies that is being stored here. Okay, in the 7th step, the service provider is saying that, hey, I got that cookies, so now you can request for whatever the resource that you want. Okay, it's sending a notification to the browser. So browser will request again, like, I want to use the admin dashboard, or I want to use the end user dashboard. Like this, it will send a request again, okay, for a resource, and the resource will be granted to the end users or the browsers. Okay, because there is a cookie, session cookie already available. Okay. Okay, so now we just talked about the flow. Okay, how identity provider is talking with the browser, how the browser is talking with service provider, how service provider is sending request back again to the identity provider for SAML assertion, how that is happening. Okay, that we have talked about that. But how the entire stuffs are being configured, that we are going to see now. Okay, now like to initiate this entire flow, right, we need to configure few stuffs both in the identity provider end and the service provider end, because the service provider needs to know that, okay, whenever someone hitting the URL, to which identity provider I need to route this request. Okay, that service provider need to know that configuration should be there in the service provider. Also, service provider will send a notification to identity provider. Identity provider will create a SAML assertion, okay, assertion file message. Identity provider need to send back that message to the service provider only. Okay, Salesforce service provider only. It should not send to any other service provider that we have, because we will be having plenty of service providers that we will be integrating with Okta, right? So it should send only to that particular service provider which the request has been initiated, request has been came from. Okay, so for that we need some type of configuration that should happen at the identity provider end also. Okay, we will see how we can do that and what are all the details that we need for configuring those configuration in both identity provider and service provider end. Okay, any questions on this?
No.
Now let's talk about all those stuffs, whatever we have seen, right, in detail. Okay, so SAML request is nothing but a request has been initiated from service provider to identity provider for requesting the authentication information. That we will call it a SAML request. Okay, this flow from here to here to this flow. Okay, it is requesting, right, 2 to 3, 3 to 4. So this is the SAML request. Okay, so here you can see SAML request and SAML request. Okay, SAML request is being sent from service provider to identity provider. That's what it is mentioned. SAML request is also known as the authentication request, is generated by the service provider to request an authentication where in the identity provider. Okay, and SAML response. Okay, now Okta have completed that information, okay, and it have processed that assertion and it have created that message. Okay, that message needs to be sent back to the service provider, right? That we will call it a SAML response. Okay, like we can say, like identity provider sending the SAML response back to the application. Okay, SAML request is nothing but application is requesting SAML request from Okta, I mean to Okta. So the request has been, SAML request has been sent from the service provider to identity provider. So that's what we will call it a SAML response. Any questions on the SAML response? You can see the content also. It is generated by the identity.
Okay. SAML response is given by identity provider, and what it is like, it assertion of authentication that user details.
Basically it's a message. Okay, here we, like if you're talking about a technical term, it's an authenticated user's assertion. Okay, but we are saying in a common term, it's a message. Okay, what message? Successful message.
Provider to service provider.
Yes, correct. That we will call it a SAML response. Okay, is it clear?
Yeah.
Okay, now the another one is service provider initiated flow, SP initiated flow. I think this I have covered in the first thing itself today. So identity provider, if you hit URL called https://salesforce.com, okay, the flow starts from here, because you directly hit the service provider, right? So from this it goes to the service provider automatically. You are hitting that URL, okay, service provider URL, and it will send for request. Request will be processed here. Response will be sent back. Okay, this flow will call it as SP flow, service provider initiated flow. Okay, because you are entering the URL of service provider, not the IDP URL. Okay, that we will call it as SP initiated flow. Okay, this is somewhat an important question in interview if you attend anything. So they will ask what is IDP initiated flow or what is SP initiated flow. They will ask this question. Okay, so you need to be in the position to answer that. Okay, and the IDP flow, identity provider initiated flow. Okay, that is nothing but if you hit the URL or if you hit the application tile from Okta, that we will call it as identity provider. Here in this scenario, right, there will be no SAML request. Okay, only service provider will send a request, SAML request to identity provider. But here in this scenario, SAML request will not be initiated because user enter the URL of IDP itself. Okay, he is not entering the URL of SP, service provider. Okay, he is starting from the IDP, and IDP will process that user and it will process the message that will be sent as a response to the application service provider. So no SAML request will come into the picture if you work on identity provider initiated flow.
Okay.
Okay, if it is an initiated SP initiated flow, both the message will be sent, SAML request message and SAML response message. Okay, but if it is an identity provider flow, only SAML response will be sent from IDP to SP.
Okay.
Clear, right?
Yeah. So, but mostly these days, all the applications, it's again integrated with Okta. That means we are using like identity provider initiators only, right? So we are not
No,
using direct.
no, you can do it. You can,
We can
see
do
two
it,
ways.
but we can do it, but it's an easy way, right? So
Yes, yes,
because again to need to remember of all the URLs. So instead of like we are integrating directly
yeah,
the applications into identity provider
yeah.
initiators only, right? We are
Yes,
using.
yes. No, actually, there is another scenario. Okay, whatever you are saying, those applications can able to, make your tile available in the Okta console. Okay, there are few applications which has been integrated with Okta for SSO. Those applications you cannot allocate tile in Okta. Okay, there is no option. Let's say, for example, OpenID Connect applications. Okay, few OpenID Connect applications cannot the tile will not be available for those applications in Okta dashboard. So at that time, obviously, you need to go with the SP initiator flow.
Okay,
And
that means
also there will be
that URL.
you need to enter the service provider URL, and there will be some requirement also. Some application they will say like, no, I want my users to access from the SP initiated URL only. I don't want my users to be accessed from the Okta console. Okay, Okta is, I just want.
But even though if you are like Okta tile will be not there in there's some applications, but their authentication should be integrating with Okta.
Correct.
That the tile will be not there in that Okta.
Correct. It will not be there in the Okta. You can restrict it, but the authentication authorization will take place in Okta only, because you have integrated that application with Okta for single sign-on.
Okay.
Yeah. Is it clear?
Yeah.
Sure. So the next thing, I'll come from the bottom. Okay, what is IDP sign in URL? So if you read this is an endpoint on the IDP side where the SAML requests are posted. So I said, right, so there should be a configuration should be given at the service provider end. So the service provider will send a SAML request to that particular place. Okay, that we will call it as IDP sign in URL. Is it clear? Any confusions on that? It's just a configuration. Okay, like I said configuration, but how that configuration looks like? The configuration looks like an URL. You need to enter that URL in that configuration page. Okay, it will ask for IDP sign in URL if you integrate the Salesforce application with Okta, right? So whenever you are doing at the Salesforce end, it will ask you for the IDP sign on URL.
That means the service provider side, they need to enter our IDP URL.
Correct. Okta's IDP URL.
Okay. Okta IDP URL, they need to enter onto the Salesforce side.
Correct. Salesforce end. Yeah.
Okay.
And the ACS endpoint is vice versa. Okay, in Okta we need to enable single sign-on for the Salesforce application. So what we will do is we will update the ACS endpoint URL in Okta for Salesforce configuration. Okay. So that the response will be posted for Salesforce application in that particular URL. That URL we will call it as ACS URL or ACS endpoint. Okay. ACS is nothing but an assertion consumer service URL. Okay, the full form is assertion consumer service. So it is very simple. Like, what is assertion? Assertion is nothing but a message. Okay, consumer, which means you are sending a response. The service provider needs to have that consuming opening, okay, or consuming position in that application end. Okay, that URL we will call it as assertion consumer service URL. Okay. So any other questions on this?
No.
Okay.
The certificate means because
okay,
for
certificate I missed.
After we integrating, so we'll get the certification. So that certificate we need to give to that service providers.
Yes, two things here. So I need to tell you why the certificate is needed. Okay, so let's say, for example, you are sending a response from identity provider to service provider. Okay, that response is like an assertion. Okay, it's a message. Okay, that message is being sent from one application to another application. Either it can be in internet or it can be with a private network, right? So anyone can able to block that response, okay, or block that data transfer happening between identity provider and service provider, and user any of the hacker can able to get that information of what is being transferred between the applications, okay, and they can able to modify it, and they can able to hack your application, your service provider also, and our identity provider also. It is very difficult, okay, it's very difficult to protect those things, okay. For that, what they are doing is they are introduced a concept called certificate. So what that certificate will do is, whenever you are sending a response from identity provider to service provider, it will encrypt with the help of that certificate, okay. The data will be encrypted with the help of that certificate, okay, and the certificate will be configured at the service provider end also. Now let's take a scenario, okay. You are initiating a message, or you are initiating an assertion file from identity provider to service provider, okay. Before transferring the data, with the help of certificate that we have at IDP end, okay, it will encrypt the data, okay. Once it is encrypted, the data will be sent from IDP to SP. At SP end, there should be some configuration that it should decrypt that message, right? That's where the certificate that we have given from Okta to the application will work, and it will decrypt that data, okay, and it will decrypt the data, and it will send that assertion back to the application. The response will be being transferred in a secured way.
Okay.
So that's what about certificate is all about. It's used in that, okay. Okay. So as of now, I don't want to talk about okay. So I think benefits of SAML that we have seen already. Have we seen about this Okta integration network? Let me see. No. So Okta integration network that we have seen already. Okay. So what is Okta integration network? Okta integration network is nothing but a network that is available in Okta with a predefined integration configuration. Okay, I said right now. So if you want to integrate an app with Okta, you need to give some configuration at the Okta side, and also there should be a configuration should be happening at the service provider and also service provider side also. Okay, if you want to do the configuration, it's like if you are doing an application as a customized application, you need to perform more action at your end. Okay, you have to enter all the details manually. You have to if you want to enable provisioning, you need to install a skim connector for that. So it's a long process. But if you have that application already available in the Okta integration network, it's very easy. It's very simple step for you to integrate with Okta. Okay, it's very easy. Like it's like a template that is already available in Okta, which you can make use of it, and you can enable single sign-on for those applications. But at the configuration at the service provider end, we cannot do anything because it's their end. The application team have to do it. Okay, this configuration they have to do it. We don't have any restriction on that. Only we can make use of the template that is available in Okta for the IDP configurations. Okay, that we will talk like what is Okta integration network, what are all the things that we can able to achieve from Okta integration network that we will see.
Yeah.
So before entering into Okta integration network, I'll tell you like what are all the benefits or what are all the features available in Okta integration network. Okay, so there are 7,000 plus pre-integrated applications, which means 7,000 plus templates are available in Okta. Let's say if you want to enable single sign-on for Salesforce application, okay, there is a template available specific to Salesforce. Or let's say you want to integrate ServiceNow, okay, there is a predefined template available in ServiceNow. So what you can do is you can go ahead and enter your organization ServiceNow URL and click save. That's it. You don't need to give any other stuffs at all. It is very simple. Okay. So 7,000 plus predefined integrated template is available in Okta. Okay, I think the exact count is 7,341 something, because last week I have taken that to another guy, so I just remember it.
It's 7,300 and some changes there.
Yeah. Okay, and so as I said, it is very simply simplified steps that we need to do for configuring single sign-on from the identity provider end. So it says simplifies configuration steps and faster O365 deployment. So if you are working on any other tool, right, deploying O365 is really a tough task. It's very difficult for you to deploy O365, okay? Because O365 will support different protocols. It doesn't support SAML. It doesn't support any other protocols. It supports only WS Federation. So your SSO application may not support that WS Federation protocol. So it is very difficult for you to integrate O365 apps with any other SSO tools. But Okta, it is very simple. Okay, that's why they have mentioned faster Office 365 deployments. Okay, and also you can say you can define the life cycle management in an automated way. Okay, automated way in the sense, let's say for example, you want to grant access to any of the users that is being onboarded to Okta automatically or in a periodic manner, you can do it. There is an automation way you can go ahead and do it. Okay, that is possible. And simplified sign on from Active Directory. So it is a common one for Okta. So it is not specific to Okta integration network, but they are mentioning this as also as a feature. So we are going to get the authentication authorization information from Active Directory with the help of AD agents. Okay, it's a simplified one for doing the authentication authorization from Active Directory. Okay, and gain exposures to thousands of Okta customers. So what is thousands of Okta customers? So all the 7,000 plus applications, right? So they are Okta customers. Okay, they have their configuration pre-integrated in Okta. So in that way, you can able to access all those applications and you can define the configuration for your organization. You can make use of the template that is available. Okay, and simplify knowledge base for administrators. So for each and every application integration, right, they will generate the KB article. For example, if you are integrating ServiceNow, okay, they will tell you how to integrate at the identity provider. At the same time, they will tell you how to integrate the same thing at the service provider end also. So what you can do is you can share this KB article to the service provider team, and they will ask you to and they will ask the team to follow the steps for configuring single sign-on at the service provider end. Okay, there are many KB articles like that available. So even though if they don't know how to enable SSO, service provider don't know how to enable SSO, how to configure SSO, with the help of the KB article that is being shared by this Okta integration network, right, they can able to configure that from their end. Is it clear?
Yeah.
And categories. So there are categories available. For example, if you want to perform any HR application SSO enablement, you can go ahead and do it by clicking HR applications tag, and you can configure it. Like it is very simple categorization. You can make use of it. Okay.